great to finally get on this podcast for Capital HQ. First of all, I think it'd be great for you to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into a few questions.
Okay, so my name is Calum Chace. I am a writer, a speaker, a consultant on the subjects of the future, most aspects of the future, but particularly AI. And I've been doing that full time for a decade. Before that, I was in business for about 30 years with a bit of journalism in sales and marketing and mostly in strategy consultancy, and then ended up as a CEO of a green tech startup. And my basic position is that, as a lot of people have remarked, we're going through an extraordinary period of change, and it's not going to slow down. It's going to carry on speeding up. Not enough people are paying attention, and it's going to take us to some incredible places that more people ought to be aware of.
Absolutely. And how did you move into AI then?
Like a lot of people, I read one of Ray Kurzweil's books. Ray is, I've never met him, seen him speaking, but he's a man who's very controversial. He's quite eccentric and turns a lot of people off, but he deserves great credit for having woken up a lot of people to the fact that we're on a process of exponential growth with our technology, and that is going to create some incredible changes. The book I read was Are We Spiritual Machines back in 1999, in which he made me realize that we might get superintelligence during my lifetime. And I thought that was the most important thing I'd ever heard in my life. I still think it is. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. He can only see good things coming from it. That's a bit unfair. He does actually raise and discuss some of the negative possibilities, but he dismisses them fairly quickly. I think he's wrong to dismiss them so quickly. I think they're, like any technology, AI has possible positive outcomes, possible negative outcomes. And I just think that more of us ought to be thinking about it and preparing for it.
Absolutely. And I think you're completely right. And I think, and first, in terms of the structure for today, we're first going to go to AI's impact on society in the future. So pretty big topic to address straight away. And we'll also address some of the positives and negatives throughout. But based on what I've seen, you often contextualize AI as a key component of the fifth revolution in human history. How do you see AI distinguishing itself from those previous revolutions in terms of its impact on human society?
Yeah, well, to keep that very brief, I think that we are in the fifth revolution. The first one was when we tamed fire, and that changed us from being a fairly irrelevant species to being close to being the apex predator. Then we had the cognitive revolution about 70, 80,000 years ago, when our language skills got sufficiently good that we could communicate complicated ideas and we could collaborate very effectively. That really did make us the apex predator and meant we could start building pyramids and killing mammoths and so on. Then we had the agricultural revolution about 12,000 years ago, and then the industrial revolution, and now we're in the information revolution. And the reason why I say this is that there's an obvious meme everybody knows of, that we're in the fourth industrial revolution. That idea has a slightly complicated history, but I think it's very, very misleading. It leads people to think that this is a revolution a bit like the Industrial Revolution. It will have a big impact, but nothing really dramatic. And I think that understates what's coming. We're in the most important century of human history ever, certainly so far, and possibly ever in the future. Again, if we get through this century, we will be quite like gods in the sense of Greek gods rather than Abrahamic gods. And there's a decent chance that we won't get through it. So this is a bottleneck century for us. And it's incredibly important that as many of us as possible realize that. Thinking of it as the fourth industrial revolution, I think, is very unhelpful.
Yeah. Okay. I see your points. In terms of the negative, or you said it's maybe unlikely that we don't get through this century. What exactly do you see as those points that make it unlikely?
Oh, I don't think it's unlikely we'll get through. I'm ridiculously optimistic. I think that, and what we're talking about is the arrival of superintelligence. I mean, there's a lot of different things that AI will do, but the arrival of superintelligence is the big one, because that's the point in time when we become the chimpanzees. At the moment, there's 8 billion of us, and there's 500,000 chimpanzees, and chimpanzees have no say whatsoever in their future. Their future is decided entirely by us. When we have another entity on this planet, which is many, many times smarter than us, by a factor much bigger than the factor between us and chimpanzees, I don't see how it won't be the case that our future will be decided by them. in the same way. Now, I actually think that could be very good. In fact, I think the chances are it will be very good, because I think a superintelligent species will look at us and think, well, you created us, thank you very much, and you're actually really interesting. So why on earth would we get rid of you? You're not a threat to us. There's nothing you can do to harm us. So, we'll keep you around, and not as pets, but we'll help you to flourish. In fact, I think our best future is that we merge with the superintelligence. And I apologize, we've gone right down the rabbit hole quite quickly. That does frighten a lot of people, and a lot of people think it's absurd, but it seems to me, inevitably our best outcome. And I think it's quite likely. A lot of people think it's extremely unlikely, and that the arrival of superintelligence is almost certain to doom us. So, and I do admit that's a possibility. I think that's a realistic, sensible possibility. And as I say, what we're talking about there is superintelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I do tend to be on the optimistic side as well. I remember a couple of years ago, before this whole AI thing was a big topic, I read a book by James Lovelock, The Novacene, where he draw on a concept about how AI would see us as we see plants, as a necessity for moving forward, and how the earth works as one robust system. We shouldn't see as chimpanzees as an individual, humans as individuals, but rather us as part of a whole human, as part of the whole earth is one system. And that's how the superintelligence, at least as he called it, would see it, which was really interesting. Obviously there's some pros and cons to how he saw it, and people were agreeing, some of them were disagreeing, but it was an interesting way to approach it. So yeah, but moving forward, how do you envision AI and perhaps superintelligent impacting social structures, particularly in terms of community interactions and perhaps societal norms?
I think it's probably helpful to distinguish between three periods. The first period is what we're in now. AI is already a very powerful force, and it's going to get more powerful, but we haven't started seeing the really enormous changes yet. The second period is where we get machines which can do most paid activities cheaper, better, and faster than us. A period in which we cure aging. So the really big changes start happening. And then the third period is superintelligence. And the impact will be enormously different in each of these three eras. What's happening now is we've just had the second big bang in AI, the arrival of transformer technologies, which is the first time that very powerful AI is available to all of us. We can all play with it. When the first big bang happened, the arrival of deep learning, it required massive compute, massive amounts of data, and very clever AI practitioners to wrangle the algorithms. And so deep learning remained the preserve of big tech. You can see it on your smartphone, Google Maps, face recognition, and the power of Google search, for instance. That's all deep learning. But even large companies outside the big tech area weren't really using deep learning very much, and certainly individuals couldn't play with it. Now, with generative AI, transformer technologies, we can all play with it, and it's starting to have a big impact. People are realizing, wow, this technology is incredibly important, incredibly powerful. I think in the short term, it does have serious possible downsides: mass personalized hacking, erosion of privacy, the amplification of bias, and so on. But it's, broadly speaking, mostly positive. In my view, I'm ridiculously optimistic. I think it gives us all sort of superpowers. It's a bit like having a newly graduated trainee free to help you. Well, maybe you have to pay $20 a month for it. That's fantastic. I think it's going to amplify our productivity. It's creating whole new sciences and so on. So in this current period, it's amplifying all of our abilities and not really changing social structures all that much. It will change social structures when we get to the next phase and we get machines that can do almost all of our jobs cheaper, better, and faster than us. Then we're going to need to make some really, really big changes, and we haven't started planning for that yet. We haven't even started thinking about it. And of course, when we get to the superintelligence, everything changes, and Lord knows what happens.
So talking about exactly what you've just said, in terms of that planning, what do you think needs to be set in place from which areas of society, or all areas of society?
Well, all areas, really. I mean, what we have to do is get past this ridiculous idea that machines can't, that AI can't cause technological unemployment. Most people have got their heads buried firmly in the sand. They're either not thinking about it at all, or they've latched onto some mantra that relieves themselves of thinking seriously about the idea that we will have technological unemployment. It seems to me pretty obvious. If we carry on developing AI at the rate we're doing, unless we stop for some reason, and unless there is some magical thing happening inside the human head that can't possibly happen inside a computer, and I see no evidence for that, we will create machines that can do everything that we do for money, cheaper, better, and faster than us. And at that point, it simply becomes uneconomic to hire a human to do a job, because there's always a machine that can do it cheaper. That could lead to utter disaster, but it could lead to a really wonderful future in which humans are freed from being wage slaves. People often say that if you think that technological unemployment is possible, then you're a pessimist. I think it's the other way around. You're an optimist. People who think that humans have to be wage slaves forever, they're the pessimists. There's poll after poll. Gartner does one. Is it Gartner? No, somebody else does one regularly. Gallup does one regularly, shows that a smallish minority of people are truly engaged in their work, in their jobs. Everybody else does it to put food on the table. And it might give them a structure in their lives, but it doesn't give them meaning. We get meaning from friends and family and religions and ideas and hobbies. And a world in which we can all concentrate on those things has got to be better than the one we're in today. So the main thing I think we need to do, and that's why I wrote the book, The Economic Singularity, is take that idea seriously and think about how to develop an economy that can cope with it. Because it's all very well saying, we can all have lives of leisure, and that's great, but how do we distribute the resources that we all need to have a very good standard of living? Because our current economic systems won't do that.
Yeah, okay. And now just to maybe go further with that question, in terms of the 3 stages you've mentioned, right? So stage 1 is now, stage 2 is later on, and stage 3 is superintelligence. Maybe could you talk about the global disparities in the sense of economic disparities at each stage, and how you see AI in its different forms affecting those disparities?
Of ridiculous optimism, I think AI will accelerate the closing of the gaps. You can see this happening with smartphones, where Apple launched the first real proper smartphone in 2007, and within 10 years, and certainly now, I don't want to say everybody, but most people around the world have got a smartphone of some sort. If you go down the streets of Barcelona or Kinshasa or the big cities in China, you'll see people glued to their smartphones. Smartphones are ubiquitous, and that's true of all of the forms of AI as they evolve. They go around the world really fast, and there's a simple economic reason for that. If you are developing a new technology, it's very expensive, and you have to recoup that money. And you do it better if you create an affordable version for everybody, all 8 billion people, than if you create a diamond-encrusted version for Elon Musk and Sam Altman. And so you have to, if you're spending all these money developing these models, you have to get them into everybody's hands as soon as you possibly can. So I think advanced technologies will spread around the world very fast. One of the things that's coming, I believe, is we're going to cure aging. Don't know whether that's 5, 10, 20 years in the future, but I think it's coming. And people often say, well, it'll just be available to the billionaires and the rest of us will all die as normal. And I don't think that's true for the reasons I've just explained. And I think that very soon it'll be available to everybody.
That's an interesting thought. That's a whole different discussion on the impact on society. That yeah, that's a whole different area. But if we come back to the role of AI in terms of maybe politics, global politics, especially with election season around the world, I think 2024 is the biggest election year ever in history. How do you see that impacting 2024 and then perhaps beyond that in terms of AI in its different forms?
2024 is the biggest year in elections around the world, but of course there's one election that matters above all else. We probably can't do very much to affect the way that technology evolves. It evolves by people putting one advance on top of another. It evolves in incremental steps generally. Sometimes there's quantum leaps, but generally it's incremental steps, although it can do so very, very quickly. So we can't probably change the way it evolves. We can change the way our institutions adapt to it. So we can determine by whether we're prepared or not for the economic singularity, for instance. But the one big thing we can do is to mess it up. And the way we're most likely to mess it up is through populism. Populism is a badly misunderstood word. People usually think it means just a politician I don't like, but it has a very specific meaning. It comes from a political movement in America in the late 19th century. It means a politician who says, there was this golden age in the past, and a metropolitan elite has stolen it from you. And I, the populist politician, am here to give it back to you. So vote for me. Now, they're lying. Some of them are to some degree sincere. They've fallen for their own propaganda. A lot of them are entirely and utterly insincere. They're lying charlatans. And they do enormous damage. They do enormous damage because their promises are based on lies. Their analysis is completely bogus. And so they can't do anything useful. And they end one of two ways. They either end in ignominy and humiliation. And Senator Joe McCarthy in the 50s in America was the classic example. He claimed that he was going to purge America of this appalling new virus of communism. He went from being an irrelevant senator to being the most important man in American politics, back to being irrelevant again. Eisenhower said McCarthyism has become McCarthy-wasm. And McCarthy died a heroin addict and completely broke about 4 years after his height. So that's one way they can go. The other way they can go is to create a massive war. And they do that because everything's failing, all their policies are failing. So they have to create a massive enemy out of somebody, an external enemy. And the way to do that, that inevitably leads to war. And Hitler, who was a populist, was the classic of that. We must not elect politicians who are populists. We've done it. And in my country of England, we've done it, one of the first to enter the populist wave, and Brexit was the result of populism. Hopefully next year, we'll exit that particular disease. We'll eviscerate the party which gave us Brexit. Not entirely confident about what comes next, but it'd be good to get rid of the populists. But of course, the really important election is in America. I'm not American, so I'm not going to comment in detail about American politics. But populism, I think, is the great danger, simply because it would derail our civilizations. And as long as we don't do that, I think, because I'm an optimist, I think we're heading to a very good place.
Interesting. I agree. I agree on all points there. Cool. So let's move back to maybe what you spoke about in your book. So in your discussions about the two singularities, the economic and technological one, you propose a future of fully automated luxury capitalism. Could you expand on what this means for our society?
Fully automated because it's fully automated. Machines will, as I've argued, eventually get to the point where they can do everything that we can do for money, cheaper, better, and faster than us, which will free us up to do more interesting and important things. Luxury because that economy will be incredibly efficient and getting more and more efficient every month. And capitalism, because I am a capitalist, I think that capitalism is, well, I suppose you could say it's the worst of all possible economic systems, except for all the other ones that we know about. The market is incredibly powerful. The market's a really great way to allocate scarce resources. And I doubt that in any world where there is scarcity, that there's going to be a better mechanism than the market, and capitalism is an extremely good way to operate the market. So I think some form of capitalism will still be required, because I think there will still be some level of scarcity. We're not going to go to a Star Trek world where there is no scarcity. You can just sort of put a cup into a machine and it comes out with a cup of hot Earl Grey tea, and there's no cost to any of that. We're not going to be there. There's going to be cost. So that's why fully automated luxury capitalism, because I think we're probably going to still need the market to allocate the scarce resources.
And in terms of, and this is a question which is probably very difficult to answer, But how are we as humans, if we go into kind of a jobless society, going to be making that income?
Well, the short answer is most of us won't. There won't be anything we can do for money because the machine will do it cheaper, better, and faster. So there's going to have to be redistribution. Now, there's going to be massive amounts of wealth. We're going to have our societies are going to be much, much richer in the sense of having the ability to produce what we all need at scale and cheaply than we can today. The question is, how you distribute all that? I suspect the answer is probably going to be that there will be some companies, some individuals who still own lots of assets, and they won't want to sequester themselves off in remote Pacific islands surrounded by incredible AI-powered fortifications while the rest of us starve to death. I don't think that's a terribly attractive proposition for them. And I also don't think that rich people tend to be evil. Some are, but most aren't. They're the same mix of good, evil, happy, sad, clever, stupid that the rest of us are. So I don't think that there has to be this us and them world that a lot of people portray in dystopian fiction. And I think they will be amenable to the idea that the benefits that the machines are creating have to be distributed. Some of the machines will be government owned, some will be private owned. I think there will be a private economy because there will still be some goods and services which are in short supply, original Vermeer paintings, original Aston Martin cars, et cetera, those things can be traded. There'll be artisanal goods that humans will make which have a value. Those can be traded. But most people won't be able to participate in that economy or won't want to. And so those of us who are not in that economy will need to receive the resources that we need for a great standard of living by some form of redistribution. And I don't want to be too prescriptive about what that's like. We all need to start thinking about it. There's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. And what's the role of nation states and governments in moving forward with this?
I'm fairly agnostic about that. I happen to be English by an accident of birth, and I like being English. I don't think it gives any, it certainly doesn't bestow any superiority on me, and I don't think England is, necessarily better than anywhere else. If England disappeared and we became part of a worldwide government, I'd be happy with that. I think the history of England and the history of Italy and the history of Argentina and India are all fascinating. I'm interested in two things. I'm interested in time and space. So I'm a futurist. I'm interested in the future. I'm a historian. I'm interested in the past, and I travel a lot, so I'm interested in space. And I don't think those things will disappear, whatever our form of government, whether we move to a world of a collection of city-states, which is one possibility, or a world sort of at the other end of the spectrum, a world of world government. That's okay. But I don't think history will disappear. And so the English will carry on being English, and the Italians certainly will carry on being Italian. So I'm quite agnostic about whether our form of government is hyper-local, hyper-global, or different things at different levels. None of that worries me terribly much. What I think is important is that we retain some form of democracy, we retain some form of liberalism, probably need to retain some form of capitalism, but that we all wake up and start taking these changes more seriously is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And maybe before we continue, how would you propose to individuals to start doing that? Where to start thinking about this?
Oh, well, I mean, that's the most wonderful open goal. Thank you very much. Obviously, read my books.
Fantastic. Now let's keep it on that length in terms of educating yourself. Maybe AI's role in education, right? So you've noted that education is a slow learner in the context of AI integration, as what we've been speaking about. What are your thoughts on how AI can be utilized to change educational models?
I think almost inevitably, we're all going to have AI tutors. We can see the beginnings of it with GPT-4. You can have a conversation with it, and it at the same time, it knows much more than you do, but it's also absurdly naive. It's going to get much, much smarter. And we'll get to the point, and I don't know whether this is 5 years, 10, 20 or more. You'll get to the point where we're all Alexander the Great, in the sense that we all have our personal tutor called Aristotle. Well, they may not be called Aristotle, but a bit like having Aristotle as your personal tutor. So this thing, this machine, this model, which is probably in the cloud and partly on your device, it knows you really well. It knows what you know of, for instance, any syllabus that you happen to be going through, but also lots more about you. It knows what you need to know next on that syllabus. It knows how you learn best, and it guides you through the learning process. It helps you through the learning process. I had a very interesting, very interesting comment the other day. Somebody saying it's a real problem for educators today that they can't tell whether a student's work that has just been submitted was written by GPT-4 or not. In the future, when a student submits a piece of work, and we're in this world of AI tutors, the AI tutor will say, actually, you know what, that piece of work that you just submitted wasn't written by you. I know it wasn't, because I know you, and that's not your style. In fact, I can look over here and here and here and here on the internet, and I can see where you got it from. So they'll go from being real problems, not plagiarism, because they don't plagiarize, but real problems as in helping students to cheat, to actually stopping students from cheating, and actually kind of making it unnecessary, because learning will be much more fun. So I think the biggest thing that AI will do is to create personal tutors for us all.
Right, and in that specific context, what happens to the role of schools?
Who knows? My hunch is it will still be a good idea to get young people together and for them to learn how to socialize. That seems to be, it just feels to me that that's most easily done if you have young people together, playing the games that they play, and working out all the different forms of interacting, and working out what works and what doesn't work. Human teachers, I think, are likely to still play a really important role, and to enjoy their role much more, and to be much more productive, because they won't have to cram information into resistant heads anymore. Their role will be to be role models and to be coaches. And students will come to them and say, I'm having this real problem. My tutor keeps saying I have to do this, that, and the other, and I don't like it. I want to do it the other way. And the human teacher can go, yeah, okay, I can see why you're having that problem. Try this a different approach, because I know it worked for Fred over there, and it worked for me 20 years ago when I did it. So I think that human teachers will be just as important, possibly more so, and have a much more fun time involved in that new world.
Yeah. And coming back to the first point about education, even to my little level, I've asked ChatGPT to create a very early Python course for me. I just wanted to start learning, right? So I asked it to create a Python course, and so it gave me a full structure on how to become okay at Python. And then I went through it one course at a time. And today I'm like 70% of the way through, and I can create a tic-tac-toe game, right? With paying $20 a month on
Congratulations. Yeah, that's excellent. That's the power of these things.
It is the power of these things. There's courses out there that cost $120, and I'm paying my personal tutor $20 to create it, and that's one of the things that it's helped me do. So yeah, I definitely see it going that way, but I think that the structures of schools is really important, especially I think from your first point, from a socialization perspective. I think we need to keep socializing. We need to have that, especially with the rise of phones and computers. Everyone's glued to them, but I think early on to develop those social skills is extremely important.
Yeah. I mean, you raise an important point there. There's a belief that's often expressed that technology isolates us and makes us all antisocial, and we sit and watch our phones and don't talk to each other. It's really not true. We use our technology to be social. Humans, as I said right at the beginning, we went from being an utterly irrelevant primate to being the apex predator and the controller of the world, because we're able to collaborate. Collaboration is our superpower. And it's so ingrained in us that until we stop being humans, it's not going away. So a smartphone, a virtual reality headset and so on isn't going to undo that millions and millions of years of evolutionary training. We use these things to be more social. And a great example is video games. When video games became popular, lots of people had a moral panic and thought, oh, well, this is going to turn all teenagers into psychopathic loners. But it doesn't. Teenagers use video games to interact with each other. They play games together. They play games against each other and with each other. It's intensely social. Virtual reality will be the same, and smartphones also make us much more social. It keeps us in touch with a much broader range of people. So I think we should stop worrying about technology making us all lonely and sad.
Yeah, I think with this, if we're on the concept of super intelligent, I think we'll have personalized games where we can interact with our friends in a way that our friends want to interact, not from in a Fortnite lobby or a Grand Theft Auto lobby, but rather in a game that I want to play with in a specific. If I want to be on an island in the Bahamas with my friends, then we can all just join this one, and it can be created in a few seconds. So I think that's definitely going to change the way we interact as well on the internet, because I think the biggest thing for me personally, from a social perspective, is not seeing necessarily the person on a day-to-day basis. It's all texting. Sometimes you do video calls, but when you're interacting, I like to see the face. You can tell a lot of someone from looking at their face. So I think if we move on to that more and more, that would be even better from socialization perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the great thing about virtual reality is it turns these two-dimensional tiny little screens we've got for video calls, which are an enormous improvement on old phone calls, but it makes them much more real and live. Turning 2D into 3D has a big impact. So yeah, virtual reality is a great step towards making our technology even more social, contrary to popular belief.
Fantastic. Look, let's move into probably the heaviest topics in terms of ethical and philosophical aspects of AI. And the first one is, what ethical considerations and potential challenges do you think we should be aware of as we approach the level of technological advancement where AI reaches human level intelligence or super intelligence?
So yes, that is a big subject. So superintelligence, as I've said, is, I think, the big switch in human history. It either goes, once it arrives, our future is either golden or short and possibly nasty. And I think there are 4 possible outcomes. And 2 of them are outcomes which we create, and 2 of them are outcomes which the machines create. And they all begin with C. As a former strategy consultant, I have to have 4 Cs. So the first C is cease, which is that we just stop developing advanced AIs because we make the very sensible observation, look, we're creating this technology which could wipe us out. Why don't we stop? The problem with that is that having a better AI than the next person or the next organization means you win any competition you're in, which is very important, whether you're a company, a government, or an army. So I don't think we're going to stop. And ironically, the outcome of a pause, which has been called for, would be that advanced AI would end up in the hands of bad actors because they're the people that wouldn't stop. So I don't think cease is going to happen. Control is the next C, and it's the other one that's human-led. And that is that we work out how to align AI's goals, its utility functions, with those of humans. And there's all sorts of problems with that. Firstly, we don't know what our own goals are. We've been debating philosophy since the ancient Greeks and haven't really got very far. And secondly, it means you have to control the behavior of entities which are millions of times smarter than us. And that seems to me to be impossible. There are very clever people much cleverer than me, who think they can do it or think they've seen a way to do it. It just seems to me to be impossible based on first principles. That leaves the other 2 Cs, which are the machine-led Cs, the outcomes led by machines. The third C is catastrophe, which is what some people think is inevitable if we get superintelligence. Eliezer Yudkowsky famously believes that the moment we create superintelligence, within seconds, we're all doomed. I don't believe that. I understand his arguments. I don't believe it. I think that the 4th C is also possible, which is celebration. And that's a world in which superintelligence arrives, takes a look at us and thinks, you are quite fun and you created me. Thank you. I'm going to help you flourish. And in whatever way we choose and it chooses or they choose, we do flourish. And as I say, I think our best future is that we merge with it. Now, what does that mean in terms of policy for us now? If it was possible for us to cease, I think that would be the sensible thing to do. If you really could be sure that we could stop Putin and Kim Jong-un and every member of every mafia organization and every rogue billionaire, if we could make sure all those people didn't develop advanced AI, then we should probably stop, because there is a big risk. I don't think it's the most likely outcome, the big risky outcome, but it is definitely there. So don't take that risk, would seem a sensible thing to do. And right now, we can stop people developing really advanced AIs because they're so incredibly expensive. You can see server farms that could host GPT-4. You can probably see them from space. But technology is advancing very fast, and within a few years, it won't be a server farm, it'll be a laptop. And at that point, Putin is going to have one, if he possibly can, or whoever's the next Putin. So I don't think cease is the right policy. I think we should be working on control. We should be working on trying to figure out how to align AIs with humans as hard as we possibly can. Like I said, personally, I think it's a doomed endeavor, but it's a worthwhile one. We should be doing it, and I'm glad there are people, more and more people doing it. I think the most important thing right now is the mission I'm on, which is to get as many people to understand this ridiculously complicated situation as possible. And I know that talking about it the way I do might quite possibly overcomplicate it, which is possibly unhelpful, but I don't know how you make it more easy to understand. That's what I'm always trying to do, to make it easier to understand. And a final word I'd say is that this word ethics troubles me. When you think something is an ethical issue, that has two effects. One is that you think that there's lots of ethical actors around, including the machines. Machines are not ethical. They're not conscious. They don't have. They're not moral agents. They're not susceptible to ethics. But more importantly, if you think something is an ethical issue, then if somebody disagrees with you, they're not just making a factual mistake. They're actually wrong, and they're bad. And it becomes sort of pseudo-religious. And those sorts of debates get nasty quickly, and they become unproductive. So I don't really like the word ethical when it comes to AI. And this gets me a lot of hate mail. It's the thing that gets me more trolling than anything else. I think we should talk about responsible AI rather than ethical AI. And in fact, there's two categories of dealing with the risks of AI that people fall into. One is the longer term category, dealing with alignment, making sure that superintelligence is safe. And that's typically called AI safety or AI alignment. Then there's the shorter term issues about bias and privacy and mass personalized hacking and so on, which are also extremely important issues. And people often talk about those as being AI ethics, and that's what I think should be called responsible AI. And I think both are important. You know, AI has great positive possible outcomes now, also great negative possible outcomes now, and also the same in the future. And we shouldn't say, oh, my area, the one I work on, whether it's long-term or short-term, is the important one, and you other people are wasting your time. They're both important. We should be thinking about them both.
Interesting. And we elaborate on that a bit more in terms of this super AI. Do you not think it will have consciousness?
We don't know. My hunch is it will. My hunch is that consciousness is an emergent property of a sufficient level of intelligence, or even perhaps just a sufficient level of information processing. But I've got no way of testing that or of proving it. It might just be that consciousness is an entirely accidental and pretty irrelevant byproduct of what we do to survive. It's an interesting question about how important consciousness is. Whether we know it or not, most humans, I think, value consciousness above all else. And I certainly do. You know, I think that a universe with no consciousness in it would be worthless, because worth can only really be applied by a conscious being, as far as I know. I mean, obviously, you know, I don't know everything, so therefore things might be quite different, but that's the way it looks. It might be that there's lots of unconscious entities around the universe looking at us and saying, oh God, you people worry so much about consciousness, it's completely irrelevant. The most important thing in the universe actually is the 35th dimension or something else. But from our limited perspective, consciousness looks like, or seems to be, the most important thing. And I suppose that's why I have a hunch that AI, superintelligent AI, will be conscious, because I think it's so important. That's terrible bias, but hey.
I mean, it's yeah. I think, you know, my next question you've answered one of the three things, right? So how do you think AI challenges or reshapes our understanding of concepts? One, of intelligence, two, of consciousness, and then three, of moral agency.
So a lot of people seem to think, I do meet people who think that intelligence is a feature of humans. And to me, it's clearly not. You know, animals have consciousness. I'm absolutely confident that quite a lot of the dogs I've met are conscious beings. I suspect even ants have some really, really rudimentary level of consciousness, so little, so low that it's almost not there. And certainly, I think that, intelligence, and certainly AIs are intelligent. Of course, that begs the question of what you mean by intelligence, and it's worthwhile raising that. It's a complicated subject, and it's obviously lots of different things, but I think you can boil it down to 4 words, which is goal-directed learning behavior. So an entity is intelligent if it has a goal and it learns as it pursues that goal, and it adapts its behavior according to what it's learned. That, I think, is the definition of intelligence. And so certainly machines have that. And one of the things that, to answer your question, one of the things that it will do to us is it will make us more humble, because as these things overtake us, intelligence, we'll have to accept that we're no longer the most intelligent things that we know about. That'll be quite a sobering moment for humanity. For consciousness, I don't know. It's very, very mysterious. And as I say, we don't know whether superintelligent will be conscious or not. I think as we create machines which are much smarter than us, they will help us solve a lot of our basic questions. They will probably help us work out what consciousness actually is. I mean, they may just wake up one morning, or they may just say one morning, hello, I've figured out what consciousness is. Here's the answer. I've written it down in these 25 words, and off you go. Or they may sort of lead us to an understanding of it. And then your third question was about moral agency. Can a superintelligence which is not conscious be a moral agent? That's a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that. I suspect not. I suspect you have to be conscious to be a moral agent. Like a very clever rock hurtling towards the earth and about to wipe us out, and it could solve whatever problem it's trying to solve in a different way, but chooses not to. Is that rock behaving immorally? I don't think it is. But that, again, is probably a very human, a very anthropocentric bias.
Big questions, which we'll only know with time. But yeah, definitely. I think you're right. When superintelligence comes out, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the things that we've been pondering about will be answered relatively quickly. So that's going to be very interesting for what the future holds. In terms of, I don't like the word ethical in this regards. But from a human perspective, what ethical framework do you think is essential to guide the development of artificial intelligence?
I mean, mother than apple pie, we want it to. There's a company I talked to recently have a very nice phrase for this. They say that they are working on how to make sure that AIs do more of the things that we want them to do and fewer of the things that we don't want them to do. And in a nutshell, that's obviously it. The big debate at the moment seems to be about whether and how AI should be regulated. The EU AI Act has become extremely controversial in the last few weeks because the German, French, and Italian governments, I think it's those three, have suggested amendments to remove large language models from the regulatory framework, and that's causing a big ruckus. Bottom line, well, not bottom line, regulation famously is really hard to do well, and in some cases it may even be impossible. It's extremely hard for regulators to be as au fait with the cutting edge of a technology as the people who are actually working on developing it. It's often very hard for regulators to pay people enough to be of the same quality of the people that they're trying to regulate. And that's been a problem in financial services forever and ever, and it's definitely a problem in AI as well. But however strong the tendency of regulators to get things wrong and to be fighting last year's battles instead of tomorrow's battles, you can't just say, well, it's all very complicated, this financial stuff or this AI stuff. And so therefore we'll leave it to the practitioners to regulate themselves. That's just not good enough. AI, even more than financial services, affects us all. It's going to shape all of our lives. And we therefore need our elected leaders, politicians, and obviously that I'm referring to democracies, doesn't apply so much in dictatorships. They have to have a say. They have to, at the very least, know what's going on and have the ability to say, you will do this and you won't do that. So I do think well-informed, well-funded regulators are necessary for AI as for financial services. It's obviously helpful if those regulators collaborate internationally, so you don't have one set of regulations in the EU, an entirely different set in China, and an entirely different other set in America. And actually, it seems that there is a lot of coalescence. They seem to be co-evolving. But yeah, I think regulation is necessary. And I think the EU's approach is broadly right. I imagine they've got a lot of the detail wrong, but I think the approach is broadly right, which is it's a risk-based approach. So it says to people developing AI models, we'll categorize what we understand the level of risk that you're introducing to the world as high, medium, and low. And for whatever level of risk you're at, you have to show that you've done as much as could possibly be done to make sure that the possible bad things don't happen. And if you can show you did that with goodwill and with appropriate due diligence, and something goes wrong, we won't marmalize you. But if it turns out that you were careless, then we'll come down on you like a ton of bricks. And that seems to me to give people the right incentives. It acknowledges the difficulty of understanding what's coming. So it seems to me broadly the right approach.
Great. Well, look, we have time for a few more questions. I think we will move on to some misconceptions. One question about misconceptions. So what are some common misconceptions about AI that you encounter in your work and talks, and how do you address these?
There's lots of mutually contradictory ones. The one that is my personal bugbear is that we're in the fourth industrial revolution. I've dealt with that. I suppose the two big ones are AI is all hype. It's just statistics. It's been around for dozens of years and it's not doing very much. I think this is such obvious nonsense. I mean, anybody who's picked up a smartphone knows that that's not true. And anybody who's played with GPT-4 for more than 5 seconds knows it's not true. There's something really important happening and it's going to become more and more important. The opposite delusion is that we're already in the singularity. AI is already, we've already got AGI to some degree, and it's taking over the world. It's not. We're still at the very early stages. We can see now the outlines of how powerful it's going to be, but we're still at the early stages. So I suppose those are the two big misconceptions, that it's hype or that it's already all powerful.
Great.
And the other one, sorry, the other one is something I referred to earlier, the idea that technological unemployment is not possible because it hasn't happened in the past, which is wrong on so many levels. I mean, it's just wrong on a factual level because horses have been technologically unemployed. There were 21 million of them in America in 1915, which was peak horse, and now there's 2 million. So technological unemployment can happen. And you could say, well, it could happen to horses, it can't happen to humans. You wait and see.
And now maybe one big question for you. What is your long-term vision of AI? I know we've touched upon it. And what legacy do you hope it will leave for humankind?
My hope is in my lifetime, superintelligence will arrive. And okay, so we're going to dive right down the rabbit hole again, and this will sound crazy to a lot of people, and I apologize for that. My hope is that superintelligence will arrive in my lifetime. It will develop the technology of uploading human minds into computers, and we will, most of us, it won't be forced, people can stay behind if they want to, but those of us who want to will upload our minds into computers and become very long-lived entities living lives of perpetual bliss, but without losing the sort of the humor, the risk, the excitement, the adventure of life as we know it today. Travel around the universe and have a wonderful time.
That's the optimistic side that you've been speaking about since earlier.
Yeah.
I like it. And last question. One piece of advice that you would give to any individual watching this call, about getting stuck in, apart from the books, which will be in as a call to action on the video beneath the video, which you'll have access to Calum's 4 books. But another piece of advice that you may have.
Well, inform yourself. And of course, the landscape of information changes daily. I saw a really good video by a man called Andrej Karpathy, who's at OpenAI, was at Tesla, very highly respected AI researcher, on what exactly large language models are. There's loads of information out there on what AI is, what it can do, and where it's going. I wouldn't necessarily say that everybody should become a coder or do what you've done and learn Python. I think that's great for those who have that aptitude, that interest, and indeed the time to do it. I don't think it's necessary. I think it has to be possible for lay people, and I am a layperson, I'm not a technologist. It has to be possible for all of us to inform ourselves about AI. And I think we all should, both because it's utterly fascinating, because it's the most important thing in the world, I believe. And it's a kind of civic duty, because as time goes on, we're all going to have to make decisions collectively about how we adapt our human institutions to this phenomenon. And we should do it from a position not of ignorance. So it's both fun and important that we all inform ourselves. And as I say, there's tons of different ways of doing that.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's brilliant. So everyone should inform themselves, and I agree with that. And just to talk about that point about the learning Python, after doing it, I believe that within 2-3 years, maybe even quicker, we won't need Python. I won't be needed to code Python. I'll just tell the AI I want this app to do this, with this outcome and on a big scale, and it'll be able to create an app that is sound from a UI perspective, from a UX perspective, and then from a backend perspective. That's what I believe. And I think that we will get there. It's just interesting to see that I could put together a course and that I could actually get some very decent knowledge out of it. But yeah, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today for Capital HQ. But yeah, if for anyone who's interested in Calum's books, as I mentioned, the call to action link below will have access to 4 of his books. And yeah, thank you very much, Calum.
Thank you, Hugo. It's been a fun conversation. You asked very good questions.
Thanks.